Do you have a bunch of garlic bulbs, and are you looking for a new way to preserve that wonderful flavor? Well, how about making garlic powder? Join me today as I show you how to make garlic powder from fresh garlic cloves. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and this is my garlic harvest. Now, I'm planning on doing a lot with these garlic bulbs. Many of them will be saved to plant again in a few months. I'll pickle some, I'll ferment some, I'll use a lot of it fresh, and I'll dry some by making garlic powder and garlic salt. And all of those are extremely easy to do. Today, I'm focusing on garlic powder. So let me show you all of the steps involved. Now, I think you'll get the best garlic powder when you grow the garlic yourself and when you choose a variety of different types of garlic and then combine those different varieties together to get a really unique garlic powder. Now, you can buy garlic bulbs from the store, and if you buy them in bulk from some of the big warehouse clubs, you can actually get quite a bargain on that garlic. If you're using store-bought garlic, the bulbs are probably pretty clean already, but if you're using the garlic that you grew, you'll need to take off the stalk and the roots and clean up the bulb. These bulbs will be very clean by the time we preserve them. For now, we're just trying to clean off some of the dirt. We can take off the outer layer of skin so that we're left with a pretty good, clean-looking garlic bulb. So I've chosen the bulbs that I'm going to be using for my garlic powder. And as I mentioned, it's a blend of different varieties. Now, I typically will pull out the big bulbs, and those are the ones I'm going to be planting again, with the idea being that if you save the big bulbs and plant big cloves, then next year you'll get more big bulbs. So when I make the powder, I tend to use the smaller cloves that aren't going to be planted and maybe don't look as pretty, because once we separate out all these cloves and then dry them, you won't know which part of the powder was a pretty clove and which part of the powder was a small, ugly clove. Separating the cloves from the garlic bulbs is a bit time consuming, but it doesn't need to be hard. Start by taking the bulb and with the pointy end up, just squish it underneath your palm. And this will cause the cloves to spread out and become easier to separate. And I'm not worried at this point about trying to get all the paper off. I'm just trying to separate the cloves from the bulb. Separating the raw clove from the paper can also be time consuming, but it doesn't have to be difficult. So once I have a large number of cloves, I just put everything into a big plastic container. Now you can use bowls, you can use mason jars. The idea is that we're going to use the cloves themselves to separate from the paper. And so in a container, we're just going to shake it vigorously for 20 or 30 seconds just to knock loose the paper. And so as these cloves are knocking back and forth against each other and against the sides of the container, that's going to help everything separate. And so I'll keep doing this until I can get as much of them separated as I can. Let's stop there and see what we have. And you'll see that many of the cloves have completely separated from the skin. Ones that may not be completely separated might still have a little bit of the skin around it, but it's easy to peel off at this point. A lot easier than just trying to do this from the very beginning. It is important to note that the older the garlic, the longer that it has seasoned, the drier that the paper skin will be. And so I've only been seasoning this garlic for a brief period, and some of these cloves are still pretty moist after this shaking, and so it will take a little bit of work to remove the paper, but a lot less work than if I didn't shake them all up to loosen the skin in the first place. There may still be little bits of skin or some dirt attached to these cloves, so I'm putting them into a little colander, and I will rinse them off to get them nice and clean, and then lay them out on my cutting board to dry a little bit before we get to the next step. Now it's time to cut them. Now, you can dehydrate the cloves when they're whole, but they're going to dehydrate at different rates. This small one will dry faster than this big one. So the idea is that we cut them into fairly uniform sizes so that when we put the pieces into the dehydrator, all of those pieces will dry at about the same rate. Now, one of the easiest ways to do it is to take a knife and to cut the pieces into slices. A bigger piece will slice as uniformly as possible, and for a smaller piece, trying to get the same basic width of slice. Now, after spending all that time separating the cloves and then getting the paper skin off the cloves, you can imagine it's also going to take a long time to slice all the cloves. You can speed that up in a couple different ways. If you have a little mandolin, you can get even slices, but it can be one of those things where you slice your fingers. I have a food processor with a slicing blade, and so that's the approach I'm going to take. Fast, it's easy. I'll just drop the garlic cloves in, and in just a second I'll have slices. And so you can see how fast this goes. In less time than it took me to slice a couple of these cloves, all of them have been sliced by the food processor. The food processor did a pretty good job of getting uniform slices. I'm using a square dehydrator rack, and my model comes with a little screen, and the holes in this screen are small enough that the garlic is not going to fall through. Now, if you're using a different type of dehydrator or you don't have one of these screens, then you'll want to use something like parchment paper or a silicone mat to put down so that the pieces don't fall through. And while I'm using sliced garlic pieces, you can put your garlic into a blender and beat it up into much smaller pieces. You'll definitely want to have something like a mat if you're going to dehydrate with much smaller pieces of garlic. For now, I'm just going to take these slices, put them on my tray, and then spread them apart so that they're separate and there will be airflow between all of these individual pieces. Clumps of the garlic will take longer to dry than individual pieces. And even if you have two pieces that are touching where they touch will take longer to dry. So we really want to try to spread as much of them out as we can right now. Now we can do this over the course of a number of hours. I'll be coming back and checking on these slices as they dry, and if I discover new clumps, I can go ahead and separate them later on. But to begin, we do want to try to have as much airspace around the rack as possible. So don't overload it. It's better to have too little on a tray and need multiple trays than to have too much and get uneven drying. I was able to fit all of those slices onto 3 of these racks, though I probably should have used 4, but this has 5 slots, and so I'm drying on the middle 3. Now, as the garlic dries, it will shrink a bit, and it could fall through the holes of the screen. So at the very bottom, I've put a mat, and this will collect any of those small pieces of garlic that might fall through when drying. So with them in place, I'll go ahead and start the dehydrator. I'm going to set the dehydrator to about 125. That's just about 50 degrees Celsius. And now we wait. At 125 degrees Fahrenheit, about 50 Celsius, it's probably going to take somewhere between 8 and 12 hours for the garlic to completely dehydrate. And I'll be checking it periodically, and I'll show you those checks here in just a little bit. Now, you can dry the garlic in an oven. Set it at the very lowest setting you have, but that's probably going to be hotter than the 125. So you can expect that garlic dried in an oven may only take 4 to 6 hours to dry. And a lot of this depends on your household humidity. High humidity is going to take longer to dry. Low humidity is going to take less time to dry. And you can expect that your kitchen or wherever you do this is going to smell like garlic for hours, maybe even days. Now, I love the smell of garlic, so I don't mind that. But if you're not a fan of the smell of garlic, then you might want to do this outside so that those vapors are vented and you don't have to worry too much about it. The smell of garlic is permeating the area, and it smells like a really nice Italian restaurant. It's been 2 hours. Let's go ahead and check the garlic. It's beginning to show signs of drying, and it may stick a little bit underneath. So this is the point I usually come in and move it around a little bit. Take some of these pieces, turn them upside down so that they'll dry a little more evenly. Loosen them up a little bit. But they're still very pliable at this stage. You don't have to do this, but it will hasten the drying so that it's not being stuck to the plastic or whatever you're using underneath all these slices. At the 4-hour point, I'm checking all of the slices again, making sure that they're loose, they're not sticking to the tray, that they're separated, that there's going to be plenty of airflow to continue drying these pieces. And now I start looking at the pliability of the pieces a little closer. The garlic will be done when it doesn't bend anymore. We want the pieces to be completely dry and to snap. So as long as the pieces are pliable, there's still lots of drying left to do. At the 6-hour point, things haven't changed much. Some of the thin pieces are getting pretty dry, but the thicker pieces are still pretty pliable. So it's back into the dehydrator. and we'll let it go another couple hours. At the 8-hour point, we have some pieces that are quite dry, but there's still flexibility in some of the thicker pieces, and we need them to dry completely. So back in the dehydrator, this time we'll check it after 1 more hour. I checked at the 9-hour point and it still wasn't dry enough. And now at the 10-hour point, it's very close. But when we take the pieces, they should snap apart. This one does, but not all of them do. This one still bends. So there's still some moisture in this garlic. I'm going to put it back in and check in another hour. At 11 hours, the pieces are snapping when I attempt to bend them, so they're not bending, they're breaking. This is dry enough and just exactly what we're looking for. I've turned the dehydrator off and I'll allow these dried slices to now cool a little bit before we move on to making the powder. Now, a few items about the last 11 hours. Every time I put the tray back into the dehydrator, I rotated it. And at about the halfway point, I reshuffled each of the shelves. Most dehydrators do not dry at the same rate. There will be hot spots and cool spots, so it is a good idea to rotate the trays and twist them around during the process of dehydrating. That will help them dry a little bit more evenly. But for now, let's just wait half an hour, come back, and have some powder making. With the dried chips cool, I'm just going to pour them into a bowl. And now I have the dried garlic ready to powder. Now, as you look at this, you should note that the color of the garlic hasn't changed much. We want a nice, low, slow drying process. We're not trying to cook the garlic. If it turns brown, it'll probably turn bitter. So to keep the flavor, you want to keep the color this nice light tan and white color. Some of the harsher garlic flavors, like those really intense Siberian, Russian varieties, will mellow as they dry and as they warm up a little bit. This really looks ideal. You've probably already figured out that this can be an all-day process because of the time it takes to get the cloves ready and then the time it takes to dehydrate. This is actually the fastest part of the entire process. If you need to stop at any point, you can turn off the dehydrator and then come back to it hours later. So go ahead and stop before you go to bed and then start up again first thing in the morning. Or get everything ready to go and then turn on the dehydrator before you go to bed and then start the process over again in the morning. Now, to actually powder the garlic, there are a number of different ways to do it. I can go ahead and use the food processor that I used before, but with the blade attachment to pulverize the garlic, but it really turns into more of a minced garlic rather than a powdered garlic. I can use a mortar and pestle and put some of this in and then start crushing it. This works pretty well and is a nice traditional method to pulverize and make a powder of almost anything, but it can take a while. And so I'm going to go ahead and revert to electronic devices. Now, a coffee grinder or a spice grinder will quicken this like nothing else. I'll go ahead and take some of what I've already started crushing along with a few more spoonfuls and put it into this spice grinder. anything that you have to grind up beans or seeds will work at this point. And now let's just go ahead and start. Mine has a little window, so I can actually look at it as it's pulverizing. And we want to pulse it and occasionally look into it to see how powdery our substance is. Now you might have a grinder that has a setting for how coarse you want the powder to be, and that's great. That's really easy. With one of these spice grinders, I just have to keep grinding it until it looks right. So I'll go ahead and pour it into the bowl. And then we'll grind up the rest of it. So this is the last of the dried garlic batch. I'll pour it into the bowl. That looks great. Smells wonderful. Now, there might be some chunks. Maybe it didn't all grind perfectly. So now I'll take a sieve and pour it through the sieve into the bowl just to take out any pieces that might be larger than the rest. And there were a few pieces left behind that are still pretty chunky. So this powder is now all a uniform size. And these bigger pieces, I can either grind again or actually leave them as a larger size. And that's exactly what I'll do, and pour it back into this bowl. And so why did I leave some of this chunky? Because these chunky pieces are ideal for adding to a coarse sea salt and making a garlic salt. And so I mix it about 1-to-1 with garlic to salt. You can make it saltier, you can make it garlickier, but this chunky garlic and chunky salt are great to sprinkle on meats before you grill them. And if you add a little bit of coarse black pepper to it, it's a wonderful steak seasoning. But for this powder, it's now ready to put into jars. I'll be using these spice jars that come with a top that you can sprinkle. It comes with a nice little funnel. And it comes with tags that are pre-printed or that you can make yourself. And I'll put a link to all of this in the description below. But it's a simple matter now of just filling these jars with this delicious garlic powder that I've spent a day making. Gone ahead and poured the powdered garlic into jars, and then I took some Himalayan pink sea salt and crushed it up to about the same coarseness as the garlic, the chunkier garlic powder I had left behind. And now I'll mix all this up and put this into a jar. And so I've got straight garlic powder, and now I have this coarser garlic salt. And so generally 20 average size bulbs of garlic will give you 2 pretty good size full jars of garlic powder or salt. I've added some labels, and now some of the best tasting garlic powder available is in my pantry right at my fingertips, and it's going to last for months and months. It doesn't go bad because it's fully dehydrated, though I do suggest using it earlier rather than later for best flavor. And because I grew the garlic myself, I know it's completely organic. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.